We often hear this idea, right?
Yeah.
That lots of university patents must mean lots of innovation is happening. It seems logical. More patents filed, more breakthroughs. But today, we're doing a deep dive into academic patenting in India.
Okay.
And we're using our notes from April 21st, 2025, and this really interesting paper called The Value of an Academic Patent and the Pitfalls of Chasing Quantity Over Quality.
Yes. I recall that one.
And what we found, well, it really pushes back against that simple assumption.
It absolutely does. What's striking is this significant gap you see
A gap between.
between the sheer number of patents some Indian universities, especially the private ones, are filing and their actual, impact, their success in the market.
Right.
It makes you ask a really fundamental question. Are we actually measuring the right things when we talk about academic innovation?
Okay, let's unpack that. Our sources, they point pretty strongly towards the National Institutional Ranking Framework, the NIRF.
Yes, the NIRF.
As a big driver behind this focus on patent numbers, particularly for private universities in India, how exactly does that work? How does NIRF encourage this?
Well, you have to understand the context. NIRF rankings, they've become hugely important for universities.
Crucial, yeah. Reputation, funding.
Exactly. Student applications, funding streams, just general prestige. And patent filings are one of the metrics they use, part of assessing research output.
Oh, okay.
So it's sort of simple math for some institutions. More patents filed equals potentially a higher rank.
So the incentive is baked right in.
It is. And the key thing here, the insight, is that ranking systems, if they're not designed very carefully, can end up incentivizing these, superficial metrics over genuine real-world impact.
So it becomes less about nurturing truly groundbreaking research and more about maybe gaming the ranking system.
That seems to be a consequence, yes.
So what do these patents typically look like then if they're driven by this quantity focus?
That's a critical point the sources raise. This drive for quantity seems to have led to a lot of patents that, frankly, lack real substance.
How so?
They might be technically quite incremental, not showing significant novelty or deep research. But maybe more importantly, they often have minimal commercial potential, just very little chance they'll ever be licensed or attract investment or actually lead to a new product people can use.
Okay.
So they become, you could say, symbolic indicators of innovation rather than substantive ones, a kind of superficial layer of intellectual property.
It sounds like building an impressive-looking house, but with no foundation. Hollow?
That's a good analogy.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? We hear about all these patents being filed, but you don't necessarily see this explosion of university-led innovations hitting the market every day. This could be a big piece of that puzzle.
Precisely. And, here's where it gets really interesting, especially from an economic angle.
Okay.
Filing a patent, it isn't just a one-off thing. It's not just pay once and you're done.
Right. It's an ongoing process.
It's an investment, and it requires ongoing spending. You've got the initial filing fees, sure. Then there are costs for examination, getting it granted.
Right.
And crucially, there are renewal fees you have to pay regularly to keep the patent active, and they go up over time.
And I imagine those renewal fees can get pretty hefty.
They certainly can. The system is sort of designed that way to encourage patent holders to only maintain the patents that have real, genuine value.
Makes sense.
Now, think about a university that's piled up hundreds of these technically weak, commercially unpromising patents.
Right, the ones filed for the ranking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As those renewal deadlines start hitting, maybe year 4, year 8, year 12, they face a really tough financial choice.
Keep paying or let them go.
Precisely. And our sources anticipate, a potential patent abandonment crisis, a significant one.
Wow.
Where maybe most of these patents will just be allowed to expire because the cost of keeping them alive far outweighs any realistic future benefit.
So the cost becomes the deciding factor.
It reveals the maybe hollowness of the original filings. It shows the misaligned priorities. These impending abandonments are a stark reminder. Patents are investments, and without real commercial legs, they just become costly liabilities.
So all that initial effort, the expense of filing, it could just evaporate. But the sources mention something potentially even worse, that these low-quality patents, even if abandoned, can actually block future innovation. How does that work?
Yes, this is a crucial point, and it's often missed. Even patent applications, ones that never even get granted, or patents that are granted but are commercially useless and eventually abandoned, they still become part of the public record. They enter the domain as prior art.
Prior art.
And that prior art can then actively prevent other researchers or companies from patenting similar or even significantly better technologies later on.
Wait, really? Even if the first one was weak?
Yes. These low-quality filings act like static noise in the innovation ecosystem. They make it much harder for others to identify and protect genuine breakthroughs that come later.
So a badly thought-out patent application that goes absolutely nowhere could still stop a potentially game-changing invention years later.
It absolutely could. It can be incredibly frustrating for genuine innovators.
I can imagine.
Think about it. A researcher has a real breakthrough, a novel solution to a serious problem. But then, when they do a search, they find dozens of these vague, maybe poorly examined patent applications floating around in the same general area. Just navigating that landscape, trying to figure out if their own brilliant invention is truly new and patentable becomes incredibly difficult. And expensive. It can genuinely stifle R&D in that field, like trying to navigate a maze filled with dead ends and misleading signs.
That paints a pretty discouraging picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the way out? How can Indian universities, or any university really, shift focus? How do they generate IP that actually matters?
Well, the key, according to our sources, is a strategic rethink, a fundamental shift in how universities approach intellectual property.
Moving beyond the ranking checklist.
Exactly. It needs to stop being just a box to tick for rankings and become a core part of their whole research and innovation strategy. And this is where technology transfer offices, TTOs, become absolutely vital.
Right, the TTOs, they get mentioned quite a bit. What should they be doing differently?
They need to be empowered and effective. Think of them as maybe innovation curators or gatekeepers.
Okay.
Their primary role should involve rigorous due diligence before filing, going way beyond just asking, is it new? They need to ask the tough questions. Is there actually a market for this?
Right, the commercial side.
Are there companies out there that might realistically license this? Could this form the basis of a viable startup? They need the expertise and the mandate to assess that market potential properly.
So filtering much earlier based on potential impact.
Yes, a much more selective, market-aware approach right from the start. They should be making informed bets, essentially, on which inventions truly warrant the investment of patent protection.
And it sounds like that also means changing how we measure success itself.
Absolutely. That's fundamental. The focus has to shift. Away from just counting the number of patents filed to tracking tangible results, real outcomes. Things like, how many licensing agreements did we actually secure this year? How many spin-off companies were created based on our research? And perhaps most critically, how much royalty revenue did we generate from our intellectual property assets?
Yeah, the money trail. Royalty revenue. That makes intuitive sense. It's about real-world value creation, not just paper.
Exactly. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
So why is royalty revenue singled out as such an important KPI, a key performance indicator?
Well, royalty revenue does a few crucial things. First, it's powerful validation. Of the quality and the commercial relevance of the university's research. If a company is willing to pay consistently for the right to use your patented technology, that's a pretty strong signal that the invention has genuine practical value.
You argue with that.
Second, it provides a sustainable financial stream. Money coming back into the university that can be reinvested into more research, supporting the next wave of innovation. It creates a virtuous cycle.
Right, self-funding innovation.
And finally, having a track record of generating actual royalty revenue significantly boosts a university's credibility. It makes them much more attractive to potential industry partners, to funding agencies. It shows they can translate research into results. Royalty revenue is really the ultimate litmus test for academic innovation's impact.
So drilling down, it means that one really well-developed, carefully managed patent that gets licensed and brings in steady income.
Sure.
That's actually worth far more than, say, 100 patents that just sit on a shelf.
That's precisely the point our sources make. They state it quite clearly. A single well-developed licensed patent that yields consistent royalty income can offer far greater institutional and societal value than 100 dormant applications.
Quality over quantity in its purest sense.
Exactly.
Now, there's another really interesting angle in the sources. This idea of universities partnering more with micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs, in India.
Yes, that's highlighted as a major, often overlooked opportunity.
Why is that seen as such a promising area?
It's described as an underexplored yet critical opportunity, mainly because MSMEs are, the engine of the Indian economy in many ways.
The backbone, yeah.
But They often lack the internal resources for serious research and development. They might not have advanced labs or specialized equipment or access to deep technical experts.
Okay.
Universities, on the other hand, have exactly those things. They have the labs, the PhDs, the testing facilities.
That's a natural fit, potential synergy there.
A very natural synergy. It's a way for universities to directly help businesses grow, innovate, and solve problems. Businesses that could really use that high-level support.
What kind of impact could that collaboration actually have? What could it look like?
Oh, the benefits could be huge. Universities could help MSMEs solve very specific technical hurdles they're facing in their day-to-day operations.
Like improving a manufacturing process.
Exactly. Or improving product quality, reducing waste, even co-developing entirely new products or services tailored specifically to that MSME's market niche.
That sounds incredibly valuable for the MSME.
It is. It boosts their competitiveness, but it also benefits the university. It gives them chances to conduct applied research with immediate, obvious, real-world application. And crucially,
Yes.
it leads to the creation of what the sources call industry-relevant IP with direct commercial applicability. Patents that arise from solving a real company's real problem.
Okay, could you give maybe a quick hypothetical example?
Sure. Imagine a small local food processing company. They're struggling with product spoilage. It's cutting into their profits.
Okay.
They could partner with the university's food science department. The researchers there could help them develop, say, a new low-cost preservation technique or maybe even better packaging. That collaboration could lead to a patentable innovation, solve the company's problem, boost their business, and maybe even have wider benefits for food security or waste reduction.
That's a great illustration.
Yeah.
It really ties into this idea that IP, the patent itself, should maybe be seen as an outcome of solving real problems, not the primary goal itself.
Precisely. That's a core message. The sources really emphasize that the strongest, most valuable IP portfolios are almost always built around validated solutions to actual needs.
So focus on the problem first.
Focus on the problem. Focus on building usable, effective solutions. When you do that well, the intellectual property, the patent, becomes a natural consequence, a way to protect that valuable solution you've created.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. To summarize this deep dive, it really feels like the current heavy focus on just counting patent numbers in many Indian universities, often pushed by ranking systems, has kind of created a misleading picture. A facade of innovation almost. The sheer volume looks good on paper. Right. But the actual quality, the commercial potential of many of these patents, it seems questionable at best.
That's a fair assessment of the source's concerns.
And this could lead to this wave of patent abandonments we talked about, wasting resources, and maybe even worse, actively blocking future, better innovations because of all the prior art noise.
That captures the potential downsides accurately. The essential message, the takeaway, is really about the urgent need for a strategic shift.
A change in direction.
Yes, a reorientation that puts quality and market relevance first, that empowers TTOs to be effective curators, that builds much stronger bridges with industry, especially with those MSMEs.
Right.
And ultimately, that measures success by real-world results, licensing deals, successful startups, and that all-important royalty revenue.
And that royalty revenue, as we kept coming back to, seems like the clearest, most undeniable sign of genuine innovation having a real impact.
Absolutely. It's the market saying, yes, this research has value, we're willing to pay for it. It cuts through the noise.
So, as we finish up, it leaves me thinking, this whole dynamic, prioritizing metrics that are easy to count over measuring actual, sometimes messy, impact. How might that play out in other fields or in other countries?
That's a great question.
What are the real signs of success when it comes to innovation, and how do we make sure we're focusing on those rather than just, counting things? Something to chew on.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for diving up with us today.